Welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss progress being made as we move forward with identity management programs in the federal government. With me today on the show are Tom McCarty, the Director of the Identity, Credential, and Access Management Program Office at the Department of Homeland Security. Colonel Thomas Clancy, the Director of Identity Management Programs, Department of Defense. Paul Grassi, the Senior Standards and Technology Advisor at NIST. Ashley Stephenson, the Identity Technology Director, Office of the CTO at ForgeRock. Paul Christman, the VP of the Public Sector at Dell Software. And Ken Durbin, Unified Security Practice Manager at Symantec. And we're going to talk identity management. And it's a subject we've been talking about now for 10 years on this program because it is such a hot topic and it is so important in so many ways. So let's hear about some progress being made. Let's start with Tom McCarty over at DHS. Tom, can you give us some examples of where you're seeing progress made with the identity management programs in your area?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Thanks
Sure.
for having me back here.
Thanks.
We made a great deal of progress over the summer. So the federal-wide cyber sprint was an activity that all agencies were involved in.
Right. A lot of people talking about that.
Yeah. So particularly at DHS. So this was an initiative, had several components to it, led out of the federal CIO. Particularly related to identity and access management, was shoring up our multi-factor authentication access to the network. So DHS was really on track before that, before the OPM breach happened, but this really raised the bar, raised it very quickly. The department responded very well. It was a joint effort across all the components of DHS, a really great partnership with industry, and we met our marks, surpassed our marks. So right now we're about 98% complete for our privileged users and over 95% complete for our general users, and on target this year to really complete the job. Yeah,
terrific. That's great progress. I know that two-factor authentication was a big deal, and it's, I guess, it looks now like the government's getting there. Colonel Clancy, how about over DOD? Can you give us some ideas of some of the progress you're making there?
Yeah, I think the DHS context is very similar for DOD, and I'd say within the department we kind of look at identity access management from a perspective of having identity management, credential management, and then of course authentication, and then the authorization process underscored by identity access management, data management.
Right.
So we're continuing to double down on the need for that strong authentication, leveraging the PKI infrastructure and the Department of Defense's PIV answer, which is the Common Access Card.
Yeah, we've been talking CAC cards too, and we've been talking for years about if we get the authentication piece nailed, then the privilege pieces can all easily fall in line, and I happen to think that identity management is perhaps the most important issue in solving a whole lot of cybersecurity and other kinds of issues. If you can just get that authentication nailed, it can make so many other programs become possible and solve so many other issues. So great progress. Paul Christman, how about at Dell Software? How's Dell positioned to support the customers, and what kind of progress are you seeing?
Jim, I think that the word that you just used, privilege, is one of the areas we see the most progress being made, and some of the offerings that Dell Software has deal specifically with a privileged or trusted insider, and in combination with the cybersecurity sprint, the multi-factor authentication, specifically focusing on controlling, identifying, and monitoring the privileged insider. That's where we're seeing an awful lot of progress being made. Being able to identify who these super users are, being able to authorize them to perform certain tasks, and then also monitoring their use so if things go sideways, there's adequate forensics. There's the control, there's the monitoring, there's the prevention of bad behavior. But at the same time, we're moving forward with this technology in a way that doesn't impede the security or the productivity of the individuals.
Yeah. That insider issue is a big one, too. You're right. When you still look at statistically, a lot of the threats and a lot of the vulnerabilities come from insider issues. Some of them are just plain old mistakes, but still a large percentage. Paul Grassi, I guess when I think of NIST, we talked about PIV cards, HSPD 12, which standards. I think of NIST as sort of the world where some of the planning and strategy that takes place in order to enable a lot of this stuff. But tell us about some of the progress being made out at NIST on this.
Sure. Well, in my office, we have the pleasure of working with both the private sector and the public sector. So certainly a lot of time spent the past 6 months with agencies like DHS and DoD and other civilian agencies on the cyber sprint. But 5 years ago, the president asked us to coordinate and convene primarily the private sector to build a framework that would establish the baseline of rules for any entity, either in the private sector or the public sector, that wanted to offer services. And this past week, that framework was actually released as version 1.0. Okay. And we're very proud of that. I think that's represents one of the very first frameworks that is as holistic as ours, is cross-industry, cross-government, and really is a huge step for our office as we graduate out of kind of what we're calling startup mode into steady-state operations.
Yeah, you know, that's we've talked too many times about. You know, we don't want every agency and every company and in all the industries all sort of like creating their own identity programs, because somewhere along the way we want all this stuff to come together. And so it sounds to me like this framework is a great step forward in ways to coordinate, so to get word out there about what's going on and to coordinate how to move forward. So
that's right, and it isn't even government developed; it's private sector developed. So we're really excited about the fact that over 100 organizations came together to build this to advance identity in the marketplace.
Yeah, another great point. And I think the government just can't mandate things out there. We need to listen to the customers that are going to actually be implementing this stuff too. Ashley Stephenson at ForgeRock, tell us how you're positioned and what kinds of things you're doing to push progress with your customer base in the identity world.
Sure, thank you, Jim. So ForgeRock provides a open source and a standards-based identity management platform that helps our customers not only manage the identities of their internal employees and contractors, but also the identities and access for citizens and non-person entities as well, such as things and APIs and service accounts and so forth. And some of the progress that we're seeing, and I'd like to piggyback onto what Paul was saying, is in the NSTIC realm, or the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. Actually, the state of Virginia passed a law this year that was basically an identity law that set up a liability framework so that, starting with Virginia, for example, online service providers would have a better set of predictability as far as their liability to be able to start accepting those third-party stronger credentials in place of passwords. So this could set the framework and set a standard for other states to adopt similar laws so that the liability piece of that business, legal, and technology set of layers that need to be in place will encourage citizens to use stronger credentials and for the service providers to actually allow for and accept them. So I think that's an NSTIC area of progress. And I'd also say in the internal realm, GSA, the folks who bring us the identity, the federal ICAM document, have been working on an upgraded version that would provide some more technically specific playbooks, if you will, that would allow the implementers at each federal agency to be able to execute a specific set of actions and perhaps even shared code to continue to further mature their ICAM capabilities at their agency. So those are some examples of progress that we're seeing in the government space.
Terrific. I know that reciprocity issue and trusting one another with credentials is a big deal. I remember back when I left government, one day I was a secret. Well, no, actually I went from Secret Service to Treasury. In Secret Service, I had access to the White House and could walk into the West Wing area and whatever. And then the next day I turned those credentials in. I went to Treasury, which was the headquarters of Secret Service back in those days, and I couldn't get in the building for like 2 hours. So in the evening I'm walking to the White House, the next morning I can't get in the building. But I know that's being worked on too for that reciprocity issue. Ken Durbin at Symantec, I think of Symantec, I think of a leader in security in general. Tell us how you're helping your customers with progress in the identity world.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. We have a multi-layer approach to security when it comes to identity, starting with the time-trusted managed PKI. We have two-factor authentication and also moving into the NSTIC world of the trusted identity. It's all about instilling confidence in the authentication methods that you have. Passwords aren't going away, but there are ways to make them a part of a better solution, a more robust solution. And we're also starting to see how data loss prevention is playing into the world of identity. A compromised credential can give someone rights to data, but if you have a DLP solution where you have policies controlling what can be done with that data, you can help prevent a would-be attacker from exfiltrating data that, by rights of that credential, they had access to.
Yeah, and certainly we've certainly had our share of data loss issues over the last several months, so I know it's a hot issue. Let's go back to Paul Grassi over at NIST. Paul, if I asked you to point to a specific program, one program that you think is really moving forward and would make a difference, what would come to mind?
There's a few. In government, the third pillar, if you will, of NSTIC is government as an early adopter and a leader in identity management. So we've put a lot of resources against Connect.gov, which is housed at GSA, with the intent of providing a privacy-enhancing federated identity service to the government for citizen access. It's still in pilot mode and soon to graduate from pilot to initial operating capability. And we're seeing some interesting lessons learned there, some early adopter agencies that are starting to see the benefit of accepting private sector credentials for citizens to access their services. So that would probably be, our NSTIC exemplar of an identity program in government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know we had the NSTIC, we featured it on a couple shows in the past, and it's an interesting concept, and, it's, when you look at it, it's like, okay, how do we secure the internet? That's a minor challenge there, but Colonel Clancy, if I asked you to point out a specific program that you're proud of that you think's really making a difference and will make a difference, what would come to your mind?
Jim, we were talking about the PKI program earlier, and that's really the platform upon which we're building these additional capabilities across to enable a stronger authentication. And part of that is using DS Logon, which is operated by the Defense Manpower Data Center. It's a username password type capability, but we're adding multi-factor authentication within that, linking back to the same identity database, specifically for the entitlements type applications today, but broadening that for use in other places. Additionally, because we can't just say PKI, go. Right. There's still some legacy applications out there that are unable to meet the requirements to be PKI enabled. Yeah. So we have a authentication gateway capability that provides that CAC or PIV front end for an application that's stuck using username password to kind of centralize it and make sure that it's well observed.
Yeah, wow, it's a good idea. It's a good idea because I know some of the breaches when you read about them. Some of the issues were that there were security fixes that people realized needed to be made, but because the code was so old and some of the applications were so old that some of the correct fixes were not easily to be implemented. So that idea of a gateway, I think, is a great idea.
And kind of what you're describing there also is that there's an element of discipline and culture to this that the department continues to emphasize. We have capabilities in place. We need to make sure that we're using the ones that we have and that we're leveraging what we've already invested in. And there's a couple of use cases out there where folks are stuck using username password because of myriad reasons, probably sure. Money being one of them, right. And we need to figure out how to get those capabilities protected.
Yeah, interesting challenges out there. A lot that the general public doesn't know the government faces day to day. Tom McCarty, if I said what is a specific program that you would sort of like hold up, saying here's one that's really making progress, looking good, and something we're proud of, and it's going to make a big difference?
Yeah, so there's multiple ways of measuring, making a difference. My favorite way is, did we make the user happy? At the end of the day, did I get that call from...
Always important.
Right. Did I get that call from someone out of the blue that said, wow, thanks for making this a lot easier? So that program is our single sign-on program.
Okay.
So we have multiple efforts going on in all components of DHS where we're enabling single sign-on. So you use one strong credential to get in the front door, and you seamlessly go into your applications from that point. That's happening now within components, across components, and across the government. When we engage in these single sign-on efforts, the system owner is often skeptical, right? It's just another IT thing at their front door.
Right.
But after they kind of get to understand what it's about, it's not very difficult. Their users are happy. And there's obviously a lot of benefits to it. Now you can do a lot more precise auditing of who's in your application. So it's an overall win-win. So that's my top program right now.
Excellent, excellent. Ashley Stephenson, what do you think? If I asked you to identify a specific program that you think's making a difference in the identity management world, what would come to mind to you, Ashley?
So I would just add on to what Tom said, and also with the cyber sprint and the activities that took place in DHS to actually implement single sign-on that is tied cryptographically to a smart card logon. Our ForgeRock stack was used within USCIS so that at the time that they needed to onboard a whole bunch of applications as part of cyber sprint to translate them from username and password into a strong single sign-on based on PIV logon, they were able to quickly and rapidly onboard a whole bunch of their applications, a large percentage, in fact, and able to meet that goal quickly, more quickly than most agencies. So that was definitely a picture of success for us.
Yeah, I think single sign-on is winning right now in terms of programs that people are excited about. Ken Durbin over at Symantec, if I asked for you to point at a specific program that you think is one that is making a progress, making a difference, and is going to make a difference down the road, what comes to your mind, Ken?
Instick does.
Okay.
It was very easy for Symantec to be a supporter of Instick because it fits in very well with our philosophy and our methodology. The trusted identity, being able to have a federated solution instead of it being using your Facebook login, maybe have something a little bit more secure. That fits in very well with our strategy, and our Norton Secure Login product is fully Instick compliant. Also, single sign-on. We have a commercially available single sign-on product that is picking up a lot of steam. And again, passwords aren't going away, but you don't need to have 25 of them. If you have one, it'll help with the customer satisfaction issue that Tom mentioned.
Sure.
And the self-service aspect of being able to reset your own password so that you're not inundating your help desk saves time, saves customer satisfaction, and saves budget in the end.
Yeah, I know every time I sign on to something, I put in my password, I'm saying, I really hope this is the one I use for this, and I don't have to go through that getting a new password process yet again. But you're right. We don't want the little stickies on the keyboard with all the passwords written on them. Paul Christman, if I asked you, Paul, to point out a specific program that you think's really making a difference and making some progress, what comes to your mind?
I can't believe we've had this conversation and we really haven't touched on CDM yet.
Okay.
CDM, I think, is a fantastic. It's a contract. It's a program. It's a way of life. I'm not sure exactly how far it goes, but right now, where CDM is in its second phase, is really moving into the idea of controlling users, and I think that the CDM idea, both as a procurement vehicle, as a funding vehicle, as well as a technology and advisory service that DHS is putting back out to the agencies, I think is a fantastic way for agencies to help each other, for there to be some centralized government expertise. And it's sort of like the parachute guys who come in when there's been a crisis. I think that the DHS involvement with OPM after the breach was actually sort of an exemplary interaction between federal agencies in a collaborative and cooperative mode.
Wow. Excellent point. I love somebody that says CDM is a way of life. Paul Grassi, a comment on that?
Just want to pile on to that. I mean, beyond just being a vehicle to obtain technology and being kind of a consultancy, they really are focused on the delivery of capability. And not just saying, here, buy this product and figure it out for yourself. They're piloting, they're working in our National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence to deliver capability, out to the agencies, and spending a lot of time with the folks at DHS and FNR, especially on phase 2, which is all about identity. We're really excited about the opportunity for agencies to take advantage of that program.
Yeah, excellent. Good points. We need to talk about some lessons being learned and some challenges and talk about the future. But first, we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Tom McCarty from DHS, Colonel Clancy from DOD, Paul Grassi from NIST, Ashley Stephenson from ForgeRock, Paul Christman from Dell Software, and Ken Durbin from Symantec. We're talking identity management and progress being made. We've talked about some progress. We talked about some specific programs. Let's talk about lessons learned. We're finding on our shows it's always good when we talk to individuals that are implementing major IT programs. Talk a little bit about the things you're learning as you go, and that can perhaps be passed on to your colleagues around town that are going to encounter the same kinds of issues. Let's start with Colonel Clancy this time. What would you say are some of the things you're learning as you're working your way through the process here?
Well, Jim, I think part of it is it's easy to underestimate the number of authorities that go into delivering identity management sort of goals and objectives. Mm-hmm. So within the department, we've certainly had to cast a very wide net in terms of who we're coordinating with in order to realize those shared goals. And it also helps to have a burning platform like some of the security issues that we've been running up against, where we really need to work together to drive out anonymity, specifically in the networks, but also because our identity access management concept is for all resources, including physical buildings and things of that nature. We've really got to bring a lot of partners to the table, and as we do that, we're discovering a lot of interoperability challenges with the federal community, international partners. Yeah. We also have to work through a lot of tactical issues that are very unique to the department in terms of how we fight.
Yeah, excellent, very excellent points, and you're right. What's amazing to me now is just if we go back several years, cybersecurity was sort of kind of like on the agenda, but all of a sudden now cybersecurity is clearly a front priority issue for everybody. So it's a big deal. So these are big deal. They always were big deal issues. Now they're really big deal issues. Tom McCarty, what do you think? Some of the things you're learning, lessons learned, you would pass on to colleagues that are struggling to try to do the kinds of things you're doing.
Yeah, I agree with what you just mentioned. So when I started this program back in 2010. Identity management to some was about compliance. Mm-hmm. To some it was about efficiency, cost savings, privacy. But it was always about security. And kind of the lesson I learned in, being in the IT shop at DHS, you're always kind of competing with all the other initiatives, whether it's data center consolidation Absolutely. Or cloud computing, whatever it might be. A few years ago, we really hitched our business case to cybersecurity. And that really helped because now it's a linchpin of our defense in-depth strategy. It's kind of well known across the leadership as a key important part of that. So that's my lesson learned. One, and the other part is really focus on metrics. Right, you really have to show outcomes. It's really difficult to say, hey, we prevented this thing from happening that actually never happened. Right, right,
yeah, right.
Right. So you have to.
We actually got there when we get there.
Right. So the key point for us is really having tangible short wins all along the way. Just keep the focus on it. Really show it metrics, show leadership what difference we're making.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I think that's a good point with IT programs in general. When you have these big mega programs that have, in 10 years we're going to implement something, and along the way you don't have much to people are wondering what's going on. To be able to show progress throughout, I think makes a big, big difference. And I agree with you too in that the scope of identity programs. Some people think of identity, logging on. Some people think of identifying users, identifying equipment that's inside networks, identification of bits, identification of message authentication. The scope of it can go quite broad. Paul Grassi, what do you think about some of the lessons learned that you're experiencing as you work your way through these issues that you'd like to pass on?
Sure. I was fortunate enough to work with Tom and have that experience of tying identity to cybersecurity as well as the other economic and user benefits. This is good news, bad news. Unfortunately, this year we've learned that identity is really very, very critical to cybersecurity. In the past, it was more of a frustration, more of an annoyance, and less about securing critical infrastructure. And now I think with this administration and things we've seen changed over the past year, Ashley mentioned FICAM, identity is really getting its due, if you will, in the market and in the attention of not only just the CIOs, but really the business owners inside agencies and inside private sector companies. We're also learning that we don't know a lot about what a user really wants. We lack good user metrics, user data. We're making things up, in my opinion, on what it is that the user actually wants. We deploy it only to find out that they hate it and they find a way around it. And then more in the low-level kind of technology side of identity, we're lacking performance metrics. Not necessarily the performance metrics that you would see in a report out to OMB, but performance metrics in the technology and the processes that we're employing around identity management. How strong is this credential? We know PIV is the gold standard, but what about the other ones that are in use? How good or strong is identity proofing? We know in person is good, but is remote good enough? And we're lacking the performance metrics around that to be able to really, in my opinion, gain interoperability and trust that we need.
Yeah, and I think it's, you mentioned the private sector and others starting to get it, the risk issue. Just a few years back, the boards and CEOs, they were concerned with stockholders' equity, generating revenues, reducing cost. And when you talk about security, it doesn't necessarily lend itself too well to any of those three. However, what we've seen over the years now is that companies that have not taken the issue seriously are now suffering from that issue. And I think a whole new mindset now is if you want to be a trusted entity, you need to take some of this stuff seriously, or you're not going to be doing the kind of business in the supply chain that you used to do in the past. Paul Christman, what are some of the lessons learning along the way from the Dell perspective?
Yeah, Jim, I think one of the things that we would recommend and the things that we've learned is really moving away from this idea of identity and access management as an IT function to being identity as a service. Colonel Clancy mentioned the idea of having a front end to your legacy applications, but using that through DMDC, using that as an enabler to the business rather than an impediment to the business. I think of identity as a service. And the service is really enabling the mission as opposed to, as Paul Grassi was saying, the idea of this is something that gets in the way of the users. It's an obstruction. It's a way of saying no. It's a fundamental shift into identity as a service, abstracting those identities out of the applications, putting it in place in the right layer of the infrastructure, and then saying, okay, now I've got this identity as a service. What could I do with that? What could I actually make happen, which I couldn't do before because either it was too complicated or it involved a legacy application or it was just too expensive. Right. I think this fundamental shift away from managing stuff to enabling the mission or providing a service back that's interoperable with FICAM and NSTIC and all these other standards, I think that's really the lesson learned, is to move this out of the I'm telling you no into I'm giving you something that could make your mission easier.
I like that. Well said. Good point. Yeah, and we've talked many times in the past too about the IT security, identity, and physical security, and how they're marrying together. And so, as a service, you can look at it, I think, as a broader issue than you can if you're just looking at it as just an IT issue. Ken, Durbin, what do you think? Some of the lessons learned along the way.
So, excuse me. So, these are all great points I've heard so far, and one of the things that we've come to light a little bit is the idea of the two-factor authentication and its slow adoption, there tends to be this belief that it's because people thought that traditional passwords were okay and they were sufficient enough. But when you peel back the onion, and some of the things we've talked about here already, is that sometimes it's not so easy to implement two-factor, especially if you're going to risk getting the phone calls from the end user saying, this is now hard, I don't want to do this, or you have a legacy application and it may not work with two-factor authentication. So being able to find those solutions that have a balance between security and ease of use is where we see the quicker adoption. And you know, there are solutions out there. We have solutions out there that do achieve that balance. And I think just more education about those options would help the move to two-factor authentication and increased security overall.
Sure. I mean, let's face it, users want it to be as simple as possible, and sometimes good security isn't going to be that simple. It's going to be, you know, a few things you're going to have to learn to do here, and throws you into some challenges. But you're right. I think right out of the box, some of the two-factor authentications were a bit complex from the user perspective, but things have gotten better, and we heard about single sign-on and things like that are greatly improving those things. Actually, Stephenson, what do you think is some lessons learned along the way for you?
Sure. So I think one of the things that we've heard here as part of this discussion is that identity moves from being compliance-driven to driving the key values of the mission, and that's simply because the scope of identity is broad and it's continuing to get even larger with connected devices. So I think one of the lessons there is that there is value to be presented around identity to all the different executive audiences, and there's a need to clearly present the value of identity to whoever your audience is in the language that they understand. So there's benefits to be gained from identity that a CFO cares about from a financial perspective, from auditability and traceability, and there's value to be gained from identity from a citizen customer-facing perspective for making their experience in consuming a digital service easier and more transparent, but yet still more secure, but that security being transparent. And of course, there's the value that identity brings from adding security to the internal enterprise and helping to mitigate insider threat, whether intentional or unintentional. So when you are presenting inside of your organization, inside of your agency, the value of identity presented in terms that your business audience understands, depending on who it is. And then the second thing is, don't wait for perfect to get started. There's so much that you can do inside of your agency before you get the big chunk of funding or before you get all of the progress. Build relationships and build an alliance inside and do what you can with what you have, and so that when the pieces do come together, you're ready to execute. Yeah,
some great points there. I like that tie to the mission idea. I know story. I actually taught cybersecurity at the graduate level on Saturdays for 19 years. And and we did case studies. I remember one identity management case study, a hospital, that's a privately run hospital. People hated it because everybody was going to have identity cards, identity credentials, all of the beds, the drugs, the medical devices. But they hated it. 5 years later, people love working there. It's one of the most profitable hospitals in the country. They've knocked off all kinds of administrative costs, paperwork, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just drives home the point that they tied it into the entire mission, end to end. It wasn't just about security or identity to sign on or anything. It was about the entire mission of the hospital. So interesting. Let's talk some challenges here. Let's start with Paul Grassi. Give us some ideas of some of the challenges or the things that you still feel like you need to get accomplished, or a hurdle you got to get over to really get where you want to be with your programs.
Sure. We certainly have slow uptake of federated identity. The president, when he issued the NSTIC, recognized the economic benefits. There's a clear business case there. Yet we still haven't cracked the nut on usability, liability, and to some extent there's a branding issue. Agencies, businesses, they don't want to give up their brand, and they feel like by redirecting to a login page that may be sourced by some other organization, they lose that brand. So we've got some work to do there. And then, if you look at two other challenges that we're looking at specifically, they kind of hang off of that lack of federation. Identity proofing keeps me up at night. Remote proofing specifically, all the information that remote proofing is based on is already compromised. So how do we do that in a secure way? We've got a environment where in-person identity proofing is not being accepted due to cost considerations and usability considerations, yet we've got an executive order that says more identity proofing is better. And if you imagine a world where you're actually federating and you only have to identity proof once, is there really an issue? But unfortunately, we ask our users to go through that n number of times, each with varying degrees of security, and it's resultant in some of the breaches that we've seen today. And then I don't have a password problem anymore. I have a token problem. I carry around an app. I have a one-time password device. I have a USB key. I have SMS. I have SMS going to multiple phones. It used to be difficult to remember a password, but I could remember it and get in. Now, if that phone or that device or that fob is in a different computer, I bail out. And I don't think that's what our organizations want. They don't want to lose customers or to bail out of a transaction or abandon a transaction because they're lacking that second factor. So we've got to really do a better job of, again, federating. If I only had one second factor, I'd be much happier than having N because there's no federation.
Yeah, it's been a big issue for a long time as to how do you prove who you are for that first credential, to get that credential. And it's been a big issue and one that there's been all kinds of ideas out there, but I guess slowly we're seeing progress. But also we bear in mind the kids are coming, the next generation's coming with, and talk about remote access issues and the need to have ways to solve some of these problems. I want to continue the discussion on challenges here before we switch to the future. But before we do that, I'd like to take another short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Tom McCarty from Homeland Security, Colonel Clancy from Department of Defense, Paul Grassi from NIST, Ashley Stephenson from ForgeRock, Paul Christman from Dell Software, and Ken Durbin from Symantec. We're talking identity management. We've talked about progress in specific programs and lessons. Now we're talking some challenges, some of the hard things left to do. Tom McCarty, what are some of the things that are still difficult, things that you need to, the hurdle you got to get over yet to get to where you really want to be?
So two things. So one on more of a kind of a business end, right? When we have success and we focus on metrics and we show progress, a lot of the leadership thinks we're done. And it's such a challenge. IT is kind of never ending. It's always evolving. Absolutely. So it's trying to make that case of what's next. And so one of the programs we have on what's next is what we call access lifecycle management, where we're trying to take a lot of the efficiencies out of bringing people into the environment, giving them the proper access, removing access when they don't need it anymore, if they change jobs or they leave the department. So that's a big area of kind of honing our pitch on why that's going to be beneficial to the department with limited resources. The other challenge on a technical point of view is mobile authentication. So that's, we're rapidly moving into a mobile environment, moving from the desktop to smartphones, tablets, but we still have the same requirements, right? We have the same strong authentication requirements. We have the same requirements to protect our data. Now we're carrying around in our pocket, right? So, we have projects going on to really make some progress in those areas. Yeah,
going to be a key area. Colonel Clancy, what are some of the challenges yet that you feel like you need to get by to be where you're comfortable, that you've reached the place you want to be?
Well, I think from the department's perspective, one of the real driving concerns is staying ahead of the adversaries. We have evolving threats and tactics, techniques, and procedures, as we call them, and it seems like that's always a driver. The drive to non-replayable authentication. Guarding those hashes. Used to be okay to we didn't even think about that as an issue before, and now we have to drive in, and we're always looking for what is the adversary going to do next, and how can we stay ahead of that with all these, massive programs and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And that's really that's a big chunk of it, is just the complexity in the space, the size of the DoD, the number of devices, thousands of enclaves. There's a lot to worry about in that space, and trying to have some sort of uniform way of securing it. Right. I'd also say, I mentioned it earlier, we have disconnected users. I think a lot of the technologies that we use in industry rely upon always being connected. Mm-hmm. And that's something that within the department we can't always do. So we have to figure out how to store forward the sorts of identity access management data so that that disconnected user, whether aboard a ship or in a tactical environment, they're able to use all these capabilities.
Yeah, excellent point. When you think of the complexity, what you're talking about here with technology today, and connectivity to the internet and what that brings, and remote and wireless, and it's tough. Some tough issues there. But it sounds like you're well aware of them and trying to knock them off one by one. Paul Christman, what are some of the challenges that you think are out there that need to be overcome in order to get where we want to get with the identity management?
We've touched on two of them. First, usability, user adoption, users getting around cumbersome systems. The second, we've talked about integration with applications, either modern applications or legacy applications. I'm going to pull back a little bit and say one of the biggest challenges we've got is in governance and engaging with the mission owners to have them participate in the creation of the access rights and to participate in the enforcement of those access rights as a mission owner, rather than saying, oh, this is an IT problem. If you just get the bits in the right place, we'd all be happy. Well, the idea of really planning the governance and engaging the mission owner up front as an active participant, as well as educating your end users as to what their roles are in this whole security endeavor that we're trying to do. Both of those things expand beyond IT, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. I think we're making better progress on that when you have expressions like see something, say something. But if we move into that idea where we're engaging both the mission owners in the governance and the users in the implementation and the ongoing day-to-day security posture, I think that's a huge leap forward for us.
Yeah, I like that idea of governance. I think Tom McCarty sort of alluded to that too, and he was talking about, hey, we're not done. We have to manage this stuff, and we have to have ways to manage access management rights and everything else. There's a whole other set of issues there connected with governance to keep the program.
It's the business owner who decides who has access to what, not the IT fellow who says, okay, I'm going to enable that business decision. It's not about, is the database encrypted, or is it, oh, geez, I can get to this router or this switch or whatever. It's really, should the business owner enable that access?
Right. Ashley, what do you think? What's some challenges you think are still out there?
Well, I think we've heard overall that the great challenge with identity is that the scope is so broad that you have to tackle all of it to a certain extent to meet your security and your functionality goals, because the attacker will find the weakest link. So we've talked about governance, we've talked about single sign-on. If you think about fine-grained authorization, you could have someone authenticated to the highest level, but if they have too many rights that they're not supposed to have, there's still a risk of an unintentional or intentional insider threat causing a problem. And also the challenge is, because identity is connected to everything, it's the ability, the need to find the needle in the haystack of the interconnected relationships between all the people and the access and the credentials to get insight as to what's going on, to either give a better user experience or to mitigate potential threats and discover what's happening. So the challenge is all of these pieces need to come together to get to the goals that we actually need to reach, and it's a lot of different moving parts that need to come together.
Yeah, we actually heard someone say it's getting to be more than finding a needle in a haystack. It's now finding a needle in a stack of needles. In terms of some of the challenge. Ken, I'd like to hear from you too, but I'd like to switch the question. We're down to the last segment of our show here, so I'd like to for you all to think about looking out in the future and give us like your minute-and-a-half version of what this all means down the road. As we implement these IDM programs, what are some of the future things that, exciting things that could happen if we get these programs where we want them to be? Ken, what's your crystal ball look like down the road?
Well, it's interesting because it's going to address the challenge question as well. Okay. And it has to do with the trusted identity and federation that NSTIC is calling for. We have a product that's out there that does what NSTIC wants it to do, and we are getting adoption in different market segments. But if Connect.gov were to really take off and to really solidify, I think that would help with the adoption of the concept. The single sign-on, I mean, this isn't too far in the future. This is some stuff that's going on right now, but it's going to take us into the future, being able to manage all these applications with a single password and the self-service aspect of it. And then finally, I would go back to data management. It has to be an aspect of identity and access management, being able to control what an authorized user can do with that data, so that if that credential is compromised, there's a policy there to keep them from being able to do bad things with the data. That technology, it's all starting to blend together, and I think it's going to really help with more secure future.
Excellent points. Ashley, what's the future look like for you here? Where's this all going?
Sure. So the future, which is happening right now, is that there's a whole new class of identities joining the ecosystem, and that is connected devices. And they need the same set of identity characteristics that was talked about earlier. They need strong credentials. They need identity proofing. They need authentication and authorization, but with a twist, because now you're talking about devices and not human beings. But they need to be trusted if we're going to make mission decisions based on the data that they're sending. We need to know that it's accurate, and we need to be able to control what people are able to do to these devices that make changes in the physical world. And so the predictions are, by the people who make these types of predictions, that we'll see 50 billion connected devices by 2020, which is going to far outnumber the amount of people for which we have to manage identities. So we need to be prepared and prepare now to manage the identities and the credentials and the access of these connected things and the relationships between the things and the people and the organizations, because again, the weakest link is what gets attacked, and when these things are on our networks, they need to be secured, or that's the way that the attacker will get in.
Excellent points. In fact, we just added the Internet of Things as to a new topic for our radio shows in the upcoming months because of those issues. Paul Grassi, what's it look like for you down the road?
Piggybacking off what Ashley said, definitely IoT. The problems or the challenges that need to be addressed there are compounded by the fact that IoT wearable may actually be an authentication factor. And we've got a pilot that's looking at the intersection of IoT and identity. We are going to start applying much more measurement science to identity and access management. A lot of the existing standards and guidelines are a little bit fuzzy. We believe in them. They've been time tested for over 10 years, but we want to add some level of granularity to that so that we can decide empirically, is that SMS factor as strong as that FIDO hardware token? We think we know, but we don't. We want to add measurement science to that. And I guess this is the plug time. We're hosting a workshop January 12th and 13th to explore that with our public and private sector partners. And I think the third thing that we're focused on in terms of the future is privacy-enhancing technology and advanced cryptography. How can we build some of these technologies directly into software, into hardware, so we don't depend on paper policy and more of the capital P policy to control privacy, put that technology into software, and we'd be much better off.
Yeah, very good points. I've made the point several times. It's at this point to me that we even have something called a firewall, because if the systems were built securely in the first place, we wouldn't need a firewall to firewall them off. Paul Christman, what's the future look like to you? What do you see? Where do you see this all going?
Two areas. One, I think what I call password plus. I think multi-factor authentication is going to be the default mode in the cyber world, whether you're a user or whether you're a super user or whether you're a thing. I think the idea of passwords plus, not doing away with passwords, but making the passwords a portion of the authentication. I think that's the first phase. We're going to look at usernames and passwords as by default not secure, and we're going to move into that multi-factor world. The second change I think that's coming is right now we're dealing with access approvals, and it's fairly binary. You provide the right credentials, you provide the right token, you provide the right whatever, and you get access. You're given access. It could be finely grained, it could be controlled, it could be privileged. That's okay, but it's still fairly binary. I think the future is going to move to much more of a context-aware risk analysis security model, which says, is this user doing something that this user typically doesn't do? Or is this system doing something that it typically doesn't do? And then how do we respond? Moving away from this binary approval process and moving into a context risk analysis, real-time security posture.
Excellent. Excellent ideas. Colonel Clancy, what's it look like to you down the road?
Yeah, Jim, I really liked what Paul was describing as far as the mission owner's role in all of this, and I think that as we build on top of a secure authentication process and we get into the authorization realm, in order to empower those mission owners, we're going to need to understand a lot more about those business processes and the data. And that data part is something that we're just getting started on in terms of tagging it and arranging it so that it could be used in terms of authorization decision based on attributes of a user or the context of the access request. So we've got a lot to do in that space, but it's really important because once we do that, we're also providing those mission owners kind of an understanding of what infrastructure and data supports their mission and how an adversary could impose risk on that so that they can better plan for and execute the assurance of their mission.
That's excellent.
And I think that's a big win on the horizon and one of the things that we need to continue to drive towards.
And it creates much more knowledgeable user about just how important the data is to their mission. Tom McCarty, what do you think? What's it look like down the road to you? Where's this all going?
Well, let me start by looking backward a little bit. 2 years ago when I was on your program, Jim, you asked me this question, and my answer was derived credentials.
Okay.
All right. So since then, about a year ago, NIST published the derived credential specification. I don't know of a single agency in the federal government that's not working on this. We're working on it. So, my role is to implement for the here and now. So for the future, I really partner with DHS Science and Technology, right? So there's two key portfolios over there that I work with. One is the mobile portfolio. The other one is the identity and access management portfolio, both under cybersecurity. So our mobile portfolio just issued $5 million worth of contracts in advanced mobile authentication. So I think, again, we'll focus on implementing PIV-derived credentials for mobile devices, but I see the future in using these mobile devices with all the sensor capabilities they have with location, biometrics, facial recognition, voice, everything they have. That's going to be the future of authentication.
Mm-hmm. Good, excellent points. Very, very, very good job, guys. This was a great show. I like to try to do a little bit of summarizing here, as I always try. I wrote a few notes as we talked. In hearing about progress, my takeaways were number one, the cyber sprint was an enabler, threw a lot of momentum in there and really got things moving. A lot in the authentication and privilege with the two-factor authentication issues and trusted identities. I heard on progress, too, that industry playing a major role in leading some of these frameworks and some of the work going on at NIST, which I think is a real good thing too for programs in general. And when we got into some specifics on that, specific programs, we heard about NSTIC and what they're doing. PKI and in particularly the DS logon that the Colonel brought up. It's specific single sign-on seemed to be a winner in terms of everyone talking about how important that is and making the user acceptance issue come about. And we threw CDM in there since it is a big program that's getting attention right across government. It is something that a specific program that's really making a difference today. When we talk lessons learned, we talked about coordination with authorities, and it's not just about an individual sitting in there coming up with ideas, but it requires collaboration with the various authorities across the organization. We talked just about the scope of the identity issue and the lessons learned, that it's not at all a simple issue. There's a tremendous amount of scope, a tremendous amount of complexity that needs to be dealt with. We talked about metrics. I believe it was Tom brought up the idea that lessons learned that if you have some metrics where you can actually show progress, you're more likely to get management attention and management involvement and get some momentum in the organization because you're actually showing progress along the way. We talked about the lesson about tying identity to cybersecurity, about how that helped a lot in terms of turning it more into a risk issue in agencies. And we heard about identity as a service. I think it was Paul elaborated on how important identity as a service could become in the future as we move on. And then something that really resonated with me was that tie to mission. It's not just about, an identity management. It says, how can we use this to improve our overall mission and make it an integral part of the mission? Challenges, speed of implementation was talked about. We talked about liability and branding. We talked about governance. There's governance issues here to keep these programs managed into the future. We talked about complexity coming with the Internet of Things, and we talked about the complexity coming with mobility. And we talked about the kids coming into the workforce in the future and what their expectations are going to be. The future, we talked about seeing NSTIC actually be implemented. We talked about, again, the Internet of Things and some of the challenges that it will bring along. Password Plus sounds like something new. It almost sounds like, okay, you can have a password or a password. It's almost like you get on an airline, you can upgrade the seat, go with the Password Plus. We talked about new context models, which I thought was very, very interesting as a new way of thinking about this, and the need for research. And Tom mentioned how combining with science and technology and looking to the future on this. And to me, the big thing is tying it to mission. With that, I want to first thank our panelists for taking time from their very, very busy schedules to be here today and share your knowledge with us. Thanks to our sponsors, without which we don't have a show. Thanks to the great people here at Federal News Radio that always do a fantastic job helping us put this all together. And of course, most importantly, thanks to our listening audience out there that tune into the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.